This is Sarah. As a child, Sarah was happy, imaginative, and calm. However, as she got older, a certain darkness began to cloud her life. She began to feel trapped in her own mind. At 13, Sarah began to self-harm in order to gain a little bit of control. By 15, she was unable to wear short-sleeved t-shirts in fear that people would see her scars. What would people think if they knew about what she was doing and how she felt? Would they label her and call her crazy, insane, a psycho, an attention seeker? A year later, Sarah finally sought treatment, and she was diagnosed with both depression and anxiety disorder. Sarah could have avoided 4 years of sadness, isolation, hopelessness, had she not been afraid of what other people would have thought. The stigmas on mental disorders prevent people from getting help that they so desperately need. Through treatment, Sarah has begun to understand that she's not her disorder. She is so much more than that. But what is a stigma? A stigma is a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. These generalizations and misconceptions are an everyday battle for people with mental disorders. Stigmas can be anything from dismissiveness to eye-rolling to labels, and it is estimated that 90% of people with mental health problems will suffer from stigmatization and oppression. Through new mediums, there are little to no consequences for what teenagers say, often adding to these harmful misconceptions and stereotypes. Does this word make you uncomfortable? Well, it should. However, it's used so often. And while it used to be the medical term for a person with an intellectual disability, it has turned into something a lot different. Now, many people will say that it's just slang and that they don't mean anything by it and they're not attacking anyone. However, we are making this word be synonymous with derogatory words like dumb, stupid, and incompetent. However, there is without a doubt that people with intellectual disabilities are not dumb, they are not stupid, and they are not incompetent. So we need to change this vocabulary. There are many other myths associated with mental disorders. That it happens because of personal weaknesses or flaws, that they are less educated or intellectual, that they are violent and unpredictable, that only skinny girls get eating disorders and only soldiers get PTSD. There are so many. However, the most widely believed is that it can't happen to me. That's completely untrue. Mental disorders can happen to absolutely anyone, regardless of your age, your ethnicity, your environment, your socioeconomic status. They arise because of life experience and/or genetics. And this is why it is important that we are not dismissive of these disorders. The cure for asthma is not to just breathe. The cure for cancer is not to just stop growing those cells. And similarly, the cure for depression is not to just be happier. And the cure for anxiety is not to just stop worrying so much. These are not phases of life for the teenagers and the weak-minded. They are serious and often chronic. They are a flaw in our chemistry and not in our character. So let us explore this chemistry. This is the brain. Now, past 9th grade biology, we don't really learn much about the brain other than it's where our thoughts come from and it's part of our nervous system. But the brain is actually a lot more interesting than that. At 3 pounds, it generates 25 watts of energy and is constantly working. In the brain, we have about 100 billion neurons, or brain cells, that again are constantly working, and each neuron has 10 to 100,000 connections on it, called dendrites. These connections aid in passing messages along, and these messages come in chemical form known as neurotransmitters. So some neurotransmitters include dopamine, which aids in our movement, our response, and our pleasure. So if you're listening to a song that you really like and you get goosebumps when they hit the high note, that's your brain letting you know that you really enjoy it. So it has been seen that people with mental disorders have an imbalance of these neurotransmitters. In this PET scan, you can see that in the yellow, serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter which aids in our emotional response and our anxiety, is decreased in a person who is depressed. An imbalance of dopamine, as mentioned before, can be seen in people who have ADHD or schizophrenia. So why does any of this matter, and why should you care? Well, you should care because of the numbers. 1 in 4 people will suffer from a diagnosable mental illness at some point in their lives. 1 million people commit suicide each year, 90% of them suffering from mental disorders. That is 1 suicide every 40 seconds. 1 in 10 children have a mental illness. 25% of them will not receive any treatment. And in a survey, 40% of parents said that they would not tell anyone about it. This includes teachers, which often sets them back in school. But if there are 2 numbers that I want you to remember the most, they are 3 and 1. Because suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death in people aged 15 to 24. And it is the #1 health issue for young people. But where do our stigmas come from? Our stigmas come from us. They come from society. History has seen that people with mental disorders are locked away in places like asylums. The media, such as the news, TV shows like Pretty Little Liars or American Horror Story, and movies like Psycho, Silence of the Lambs, and Black Swan perpetuate people with mental disorders as something violent or to be afraid of. If they don't go about it in that way, they often sensationalize these disorders, either going in the absolute extreme, like Girl Interrupted, or taking a very comical approach, like Me, Myself, and Irene, which often leads to gross inaccuracies. There are very few teen movies that have done it well. Among these are The Perks of Being a Wallflower and It's Kind of a Funny Story. In both these movies, the protagonists suffer from mental disorders. However, it does not define their characters. They come from loving families and have loving friends, emphasizing that you do not have to come from a traumatic background. They also worked through their disorders and found a light at the end of the tunnel, as many people do. If the stigmas don't come from society, they can also come from the people who have these disorders, and this is known as self-stigma, where they direct all these negative stereotypes towards themselves, often preventing them from getting help. No help, in some cases, is often a matter of life and death. There are many people who have had mental disorders. Famous people like Abraham Lincoln, Ernest Hemingway, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Stephen Fry, and J.K. Rowling. In fact, J.K. Rowling wrote the Harry Potter series in the midst of one of her deepest depressions, and it helped her come out of it. She does and will continue to inspire kids, teenagers, and adults, and it is no doubt that the people on this screen have had a positive impact on our world. So let us give everybody the same chance, a chance to be extraordinary. And how can we do this? We can do this by helping to end stigma. So I want to bring 6 simple actions that can help. The first would be notice. Notice the small things. There's often a lot of evidence in hindsight. The second is to not be closed-minded. Never underestimate anyone's feelings. The third is to choose your words carefully. We need to change the vocabulary associated with mental disorders and be prepared to say, I don't understand, but I'm willing to listen. Number 4 would to be educate yourself. We fear what we do not understand, so it is important to start understanding the symptoms and treatments of mental disorders. Number 5 is to talk about it. So bring it up at school, bring it up on your dinner table. Never be afraid to contact a professional if you're scared about yourself or someone close to you. And the 6th is perhaps not directly related to stigmatization, but it can just help create a better environment for all of us to live in. And that's random acts of kindness. Smile at the person in the hallway. Sit next to the person sitting alone at lunch. You never know what might help. So Sarah's an actual 17-year-old girl, and through therapy of both medication and talk therapy, she has overcome her disorders. And when she was asked what could have urged her to seek help earlier, the answer was surprisingly simple. She said that she wished that nobody would have accepted the answer, "I'm fine," to the question, "How are you?" She wished that somebody would be sincere and ask her, "How are you really?" So let us be the person to ask, "How are you really?" Because everybody deserves to be comfortable in their own mind and body. So let us come together and bring change to mind. Thank you.